everybody, welcome to Tuxion. Today we are going to learn Chapter 1 in History of Class 10 NCRT Rise of Nationalism in Europe. So, before we get into the chapter, let's get some basic ideas in order to understand the lesson. So, as the title says, Rise of Nationalism in Europe, let us first understand what nationalism is. So, nationalism is the desire of a group of people who share the same race, culture, language, etc., to form an independent country, or it could also be defined as an ideology used to drive and unite the population. Used to drive and unite the population to form a unified state where members of a country share the same cultural and linguistic background. So, during the 18th century, the time period our chapter revolves around, we see that people never had the sense of unity. It was absolutist by them. So, what does this absolutist mean? Absolutist means a government whose power is centralized, militarized, and repressive, say a form of monarchical government. So, in order to unite people within a defined territory, the ideology of nationalism was introduced. So, in this chapter, we'll understand that there were several factors that led to nationalism that included the rise of the middle class, the industrial revolution, and the spread of the ideas of the enlightenment. So the lesson begins with a painting painted in 1848 by Frederic Soriot, a French artist. He actually prepared a series of four prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics, and one among the four has been given to us in the lesson. So, in the picture, we see peoples of various ages and social classes are marching in a long train. And we say that there are peoples of the world as they are grouped as distinct nations identified through their flags and national costumes. Okay, they have been identified with their flags by their flags and national costumes. So, and we also see that people are offering homage to a female figure as they pass by it. Can you see? So they are offering homage to a female figure as they pass by it. So why is it a female figure, and what does this female figure actually signify? So we as we can as we if we recall, we might remember that during the time of French Revolution, artists personified liberty as a female figure bearing the torch of enlightenment in one hand and the charter of rights of man in the other. Students, I'm not sure if the picture is clearly visible in the slide, so please make sure that you refer to your respective books once the chapter is done. So, coming back to the slide. So, during the time of French Revolution, as I mentioned earlier, artists personified liberty as a female figure bearing the torch of enlightenment in one hand and the charter of rights of the man in the other. And we also see that there are shattered remains of the symbols of the absolutist institutions in the ground. So, what does this mean? So, this establishes the vision of a world where people are identified through their national costume and flags rather than the kingdom or dynasty. And we also see that people of various European countries have been painted in the picture. Say, for example, like US and the Switzerland were already nation states by this time. Okay, whereas the peoples of Germany, who are the German people here? The ones who are bearing this black, red, and gold flag. Okay, so the peoples of Germany weren't a united nation by then. So, what was this expression then? So, this was actually an expression of liberal hopes to unify people into a nation state under a democratic constitution. Okay, and we could also see that Christ, saint, and angels are being used by the artist as if they are gazing from the heavens above. So why has this been used? This has been used to symbolize fraternity among the nations of the world. So what is fraternity? Fraternity is nothing but the group of people sharing the same interests or work. So in this chapter we'll see how the issues visualized by Sorio were dealt, and how nationalism emerged, and what all the changes it brought in the political and in the minds of the people of Europe. And we'll also be seeing one important point, that is how these changes shifted people from adapting a nation state from a modern state. An important point to be noted, we'll be seeing that how these changes shifted people from adapting a nation state from a modern state. So what does this modern state and a nation state mean? So a modern state is the one in which a centralized power exercised sovereign control. So the power is centralized within one hand or a group of people. And what is the sovereignty means? Sovereignty means the power to rule. Okay, so a modern state is the one in which a centralized power exercised sovereign control over a clearly defined territory. So in simply put, we could say that it is a monarchical form of government that is militarized and absolute in nature. Whereas on the other hand, nation state is the one in which the majority of its citizens. So please note here that the term citizens have been used. Okay, so the nation state is the one in which the majority of its citizens develop a sense of common identity and shared history or descent. So in simple words, we could say a constitutional type of government where the power is not centralized with a single or group of people. So the idea of citizenship was sowed in the minds of people through various struggles. Okay, so with these basic ideas, let us get into the chapter. So the foremost topic that we'll be seeing is the French Revolution and the idea of the nation. Okay, so here we'll be seeing how French Revolution influenced people with the idea of nationalism. So the idea of nationalism, that is the first expression of nationalism, came with French Revolution in 1789. So the first time the idea of nationalism was introduced came with French Revolution in 1789. Okay. And during this time, France was actually under the rule of an absolute monarch. But it was the various measures and practices by the French revolutionaries since the beginning of the revolution. Okay, since the very beginning of the revolution, there have been various measures and practices that have been taken by the French revolutionaries, which actually brought political and constitutional changes that further led to the transfer of sovereignty. What did I say about sovereignty? Sovereignty meaning power to rule. So so various practices and measures by the revolutionaries since the beginning of the revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from the hands of monarchy to a body of French citizens. And soon after the revolution, it was proclaimed that the people would constitute and shape the nation. That is, the nation will be ruled by whom? By the citizens of the nation. So what are the measures that that created the sense of collective identity amongst the French people? So let's just see what are the measures that brought about this change and change of collective identity. So the various measures which have been mentioned are the ideas of la patrie and le citoyen. So what does la patrie means? The fatherland, and le citoyen means the citizen. So the ideas of these were emphasized, which means people of the same nation, that is a united community, shall enjoy equal rights under a constitution. And then a new French flag, that is the tricolor, was chosen, and the formal royal standard was replaced. And then what? The estates general were elected by the body of active citizen. A very important point to be noted, the estates general were elected by the citizens. Okay, it is not they aren't been appointed by the king or the monarchy. Okay, they are being elected by the citizens, and the National Assembly was renamed. Further, new hymns were composed, oaths were taken, and martyrs commemorated. And all of this took place in how did all of this took place? All of this took place in the name of the nation. And then internal customs duties and dues were abolished, and a uniform system of weights and measures were adopted. Okay, so internal custom duties and dues were abolished, and a uniform system of weights and measures were adopted. Furthermore, regional dialects were discouraged. Another important point, regional dialects were discouraged, and French became the common language of the nation. So, what is the necessary of introducing a common language and discouraging the regional dialects. Everything is a measure in order to bring unity, a sense of collective identity among the people. Okay, so when the news of these events in France reached different cities in Europe, students and other members of the educated middle classes began setting up Jacobin clubs. Okay, so Jacobin clubs is an important thing. So when this idea of when the news of these events, whatever the occurrences that was happening in France, reached different cities in Europe, students and other members of the educated middle classes began setting up Jacobin clubs, and the French army started to carry the idea of nationalism abroad, that is, out of their country to other nations within the Europe, with with what intention? With the intention of liberating the peoples of Europe from despotism. What is despotism? Absolute rule. So, with the intention of liberating the peoples of Europe from despotism, that is absolute rule, to become nations. Okay, so with the idea of making the system more rational and efficient, Napoleon comes into picture. So, having the idea of making the system more rational and efficient, Napoleon destroyed democracy and returned to monarchy. Okay, so then comes the Civil Code of 1804, also known as the Napoleonic Code. An important point once again. So, Civil Code of 1804, known as the Napoleonic Code, was established. Okay, so what did this Civil Code do? If we see, we might note that this did away with all the privileges based on birth, and this established equality before the law and secured the right to property. Okay, and in the Dutch Republic, if we in the Dutch Republic, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany, if we see, Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, okay, and he further abolished the feudal system and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues, and also guild restrictions were removed. Okay, yeah, and also guild restrictions were removed, and then the transport and communication systems were improved. One of the advantage of Civil Code 1804, the transport and communication systems were improved, and only then the businessmen and small scale producers began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, as well a common national currency, would actually facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. Because just imagine having variety of currency and variety of weight, system of weights and measures will actually hinder the movement of people, be it goods or the currency. So it was only then that the businessmen and small scale producers began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, as well a common national currency is actually an advantage for the is an advantage which will facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. However, in conquered areas, the reaction of the local population were mixed. Okay, though there were advantages to the Civil Code 1804, the reaction of the local population were mixed. Why? Because there were increased taxation. It was highly restricted political freedom. There was censorship, forced conscription, and all these actually seemed to outweigh the advantage of the administrative changes. Okay, so with this, we'll move on to the next topic, that is the making of nationalism in Europe. So, if we see Europe of mid 18th century, we'll find that there were no nation states. Okay, today's Germany, Italy, and Switzerland were actually divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons. Okay, they weren't nation states, whereas they were ruled into variety of principalities. Okay, and then the Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies where diverse people lived. So what happened when diverse people lived? This nationalism or a collective identity, the feeling of nationalism or the emotion of unity will could be inculcated in the minds of the people only when there is a collective identity among the people, right? Whereas if we see that in the Eastern and Central Europe, there was the peoples were under autocratic monarchies, and there lived diverse people, and they never saw themselves sharing a collective identity or common culture, because they often spoke different languages, and they all belonged to different ethnic groups. Say for example, the Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria Hungary. Okay, so this was actually a patchwork of many different regions and peoples, where we could see that half of the people here in this region spoke Magyar, while the others spoke variety of dialects in Hungary. And in Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. So, such differences did not help in promoting the sense of collective or political unity. So, this never helped in promoting the sense of political unity, and the only commonness that tied these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. So it was really hard to bring unity among the people and make them feel collectively identified. Okay, they didn't have a collective identity. So that was the thing, that is, it was hard to bring a sense of collective identity among the people in the mind among the minds of the people in order to attain a nation state. So then, how did this nationalism and the idea of nation state emerge? So while answering this, we get to see who were aristocracy and how did the new division of people, that is the middle class, emerge, and what did liberal nationalism stand for, what is conservatism, and how did the idea of conservatism help in attaining nationalism, and what are the roles did the revolutionaries play. Okay, so while getting to know how nationalism and the idea of nation state emerge, we'll be answering all these questions. Okay, so let's start with the aristocracy and the new middle class. So before that, let us know what is aristocracy, by the way. So aristocracy is nothing but they are the people of the highest social class who often have special titles. Okay, so generally say aristocracy is defined as a ruling class. Okay, so the landed aristocracy was the dominant class on the social they were the dominant class on the they were the dominant class on the continent of socially and politically. And what was the common way they were united by a common way of life that cut across the regional divisions. So what was that common way of life? They owned townhouses and states in the countrysides, and they often spoke French for the purpose of diplomacy and in high society. However, they were numerically a small group, though they were of supreme diplomacy. They were the dominant class, and they owned many estates and stuffs. They were numerically a small group. So, what was the rest? The majority were peasants, peasantry. Okay, and the families of this aristocratic class were often connected by ties of marriage. So in order to bring unity among themselves, they were connected by ties of marriage. The alternatives of the aristocracy are oligarchy or mediocrity, okay, which is a form of power in which power effectively rests with a small number of people. Okay, so the industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century, but in France and parts of the German states, it occurred only during the 19th century. So with it, there came new social groups into existence. Example are the working class population, the middle classes made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals, and professionals. So when the ideas of national unity so when the idea of national unity sprung among the liberal middle classes, it led to the abolition of aristocratic privileges. Okay, so now what did this liberal nationalism stand for? So the term liberalism derives from the Latin Latin root liber. Okay, the word liber, a Latin word meaning free. So for the new middle classes, liberalism stood for, here, Latin root liber meaning free. So for the new middle classes, this liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. Okay, so for the new middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. And politically, it emphasized the concept of government. It emphasized the concept of government by consent, government by consent. That is, people need to be governed by their with their consent. It's not like a it isn't like a monarchical form of government. Okay, so liberalism politically emphasized the concept of government by consent. Since the French Revolution, liberalism stood for a constitution and a representative government through parliament. So how could this be done? By ending autocracy and clerical privileges. Yet, we see that equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffrage. Okay, so what does the suffrage means? The right to vote. So universal suffrage means the right to vote for all, irrespective of their gender, caste, etc. So then how was the suffrage during the revolution? The right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to whom? To property owning men. Okay, so this universal suffrage was granted exclusively to whom? To property owning men. And what about the men without property? They were excluded from the political rights. So not just men, coming to women, even the property owning women were excluded from political rights. So it was only the property owning men who had the right to vote. So men without property and all the women were excluded from political rights. And only for a brief period under the Jacobins, all adult males enjoyed suffrage. And with the Napoleonic Code, that is the Civil Code 1804, there came again the practice of limited suffrage. And what happened to the women? Women were reduced to the status of minor. So what happened? They were all subjected to the authority of father and husbands once again. So throughout the 19th century and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. So this was liberalism in political terms. So in political terms, we have seen about the suffrage. So whom the suffrage was universal, there wasn't universal suffrage, and to whom the suffrage was given, to whom the suffrage was restricted. So this is the definition of liberalism in political, or this what liberalism meant in political terms. So what did it mean in economically? Economically, liberalism stood for freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. That is, this was a strong demand of the emerging middle class. So if you see during the 19th century, for example, Germany, that is in the first half of the 19th century, Germany was actually divided into small principalities, say of about 39 states. And each of these states, okay, each of these principalities possessed its own currency, weights, a standard of weights and measures. So when a merchant travels through these principalities, they'll have to pass through various custom barriers and will have to pay custom duty at each one of them. And we know that duties will be levied according to what? According to the weight or measurement of the goods. And we saw that each principalities had their own system of weights and measures. So this entire process involved a time consuming calculation, as well were viewed as obstacles to economic exchange and growth. So the new commercial class argued for the creation of a unified economic territory, so that the movement of goods, people and capital will be unhindered. So in 1834, Customs Union or Zollverein An important point. Customs Union or Zollverein was formed for what? This was formed at the initiative of Prussia, and most of the German states joined. So why was this union formed, by the way? The union was formed to abolish tariff barriers, and this reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. From number 30 to 2. And the creation of a network of railways further stimulated mobility. Okay. Yeah. Huh. And then we arrive to new conservatism after 1815. So what is conservatism? Conservatism is a philosophy. Okay, conservatism is a philosophy that stresses the importance of tradition and established institutions and customs, and preferred gradual development to quick change. So following the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, European governments were driven by a spirit of conservatism, and the conservatives believed that established traditional institutions of state and society, like the monarchy, the church, and what else, the social hierarchies, property, and the family, they all should be preserved. However, most conservatives realized that actually modernization could strengthen the traditional institutions like the monarchy. So they did not propose a traditional institute, they did not propose a return to the society of pre-revolutionary days. They actually realized that modernization, like a modern army or an efficient bureaucracy, a dynamic economy, the abolition of feudalism and serfdom could actually strengthen the autocratic monarchies of Europe. That is, it can make the state power more effective and strong. So in 1815, the representatives of the European powers, that is Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, who actually collectively defeated Napoleon, met at Vienna. Vienna. An important point. They met at Vienna to draw up a settlement for Europe. This Congress was actually hosted by an Austrian Chancellor, Duke Metternich, an important personality. The Congress was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor, Duke Metternich. And the delegates drew up the Treaty of Vienna of 1815. Okay, very important topic, students. So the delegates drew up the Treaty of Vienna of 1815 with the object of undoing most of the changes that had come about in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. So the Bourbon dynasty, which had been deposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power, and France lost the territories it has annexed under the Napoleon. And then what these monarchical or these aristocrats do is they did set up a series of states on the boundaries of France. Okay, a series of states was set up in the boundaries of France. For what? To prevent French expansion in future. Yet, the German Confederation of 39 states that was set up by Napoleon was left untouched. That is, the main intention was to restore the monarchies that had been overthrown by Napoleon and create a new conservative order in Europe. So, it's obvious that the conservative regimes set up in 1815 were autocratic, and they didn't tolerate criticism. Okay, so they never tolerated criticism and dissent. So what did they do? They started to curb activities that question the legitimacy of autocratic governments. So censorship laws were imposed to control the press, as well the books, plays, and songs that reflected the idea of liberty and freedom associated with the French Revolution. And one among the major issues taken by the liberal nationalists who criticized the new conservative order was the freedom of the press. Okay, so such actions were the autocratic government did started curbing such activities that question the legitimacy of the autocratic government. So then comes the revolutionaries. So the revolutionaries start to emerge then. So during the years following 1815, the fear of repression drove many liberal nationalists underground. So what does this mean is secret societies began. Okay, so the secret societies sprang up in many European countries in order to train revolutionaries and spread their ideas. So, to be revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to oppose monarchical forms that had been established after the Vienna Congress. Okay, so it was not like a very huge thing. It just mean that these secret societies were revolutionary one, and to be revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to oppose monarchical forms that had been established after the Vienna Congress, and to fight for liberty and freedom. So most of them saw the creation of nation state as the necessary part of the struggle for freedom. And one such individual was the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini. Okay, so this guy was, so this person who became a member of the secret society of Carbonari was sent into exile in 1831. For what? He was sent into exile for attempting a revolution in Liguria, where he subsequently founded two more underground societies. First was the young lady. Yeah, first was the sorry, I haven't mentioned here, it seems. It's young lady in Marseilles, and yeah, okay, I have mentioned here. It's young lady in Marseilles and young Europe in Bern. Okay, so these are the names of the two secret societies he had found. And the members of these societies were like-minded young men from Poland, France, Italy, and the German states. So, following his model, many secret societies were set up in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland. So, Mazzini's relentless opposition to monarchy and his vision of democratic republics frightened the conservatives, and Metternich described him as the most dangerous enemy of their social order. So, these revolutions were often led by the liberal nationalists belonging to the educated middle class elite, among whom were they were professors, they were school teachers, clerks, and the members of the commercial middle classes. Okay, and the first upheaval took place in France in July 1830. So the Bourbon kings, who had been restored to power during the conservative reaction after 1815, were now overthrown by liberal revolutionaries who installed a constitutional monarchy with Louis Philippe at its head, and this revolution sparked an uprising in Brussels, which led to Belgium breaking away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. Okay, so among the educated elite across Europe, the Greek War of Independence mobilized the nationalist feelings. So this Greek War of Independence is an important thing to be noted. So the Greek War of Independence actually mobilized nationalist feelings among the educated elite across Europe. Okay. Yeah. Um, so what else? And then the growth of revolutionary nationalism in Europe sparked off a struggle for independence amongst the Greeks, which began in 1821. Okay, so in 1821, there began a struggle for independence among the Greeks, and the nationalists in Greece got support from other Greeks living in exile and also from many West Europeans. So, what happened? Poets and artists lauded Greece as the cradle of European civilization, and mobilized public opinion to support its struggle against a Muslim empire. And the Treaty of Constantinople of 1832. Okay, the Treaty of Constantinople of 1832 recognized Greece as an independent nation. Okay. So when one sees the development of nationalism, one must understand that it not just come about only through wars and territorial expansion. Okay, whereas culture played a very important role in creating the idea of the nation. That is, art and poetry, stories and music helped express and shape nationalist feelings. See, culture played an important role in creating the idea of the nation, that is, Art and poetry, stories and music helped express and shape nationalist feelings. Okay, so one such was the Romanticism, not the romanticism we see in media and nowadays. It is a romanticism that by then was a cultural movement which sought to develop a particular form of nationalist sentiment. Okay, it was a cultural movement which sought to develop a particular form of nationalist sentiment. Okay, so these romantic artists and poets generally criticize the glorification of reason and science. Okay, they are often criticized the glorification of reason and science. And what did they do? They started to focus instead on emotions, institutions, intuitions, and mystical feelings. So they actually criticized glorification of reason and science and started focusing on emotions, intuitions, and mystical feelings. So so the on overall, their effort was actually to create a sense of shared collective heritage, say a common cultural past as the basis of a nation. So it was through folk songs, folk poetry, and folk dances even that the true spirit of the nation was popularized. Okay, so the emphasis on vernacular language and the collection of local folklore was not just to recover an ancient national spirit. Okay, so the revolutionaries, so the artists began to make a collection of local folklore and they started emphasizing on vernacular language. This was an act which was not just to recover an ancient national spirit, but also to carry the modern nationalist message to large audiences who were mostly illiterate. And this was especially the case in Poland, where even though Poland no longer existed as an independent territory, national feelings were kept alive through music and language. Okay, through music and language. And it also need to be it is an important point to be noted that language too played an important role in developing nationalist sentiments, because this came to be seen as a symbol of the struggle against dominance. Okay, and then comes and then comes the hunger, hardship, and popular revolt. So the 1830s were actually the years of great economic hardship in Europe, and the first half of the 19th century saw an enormous increase in the population. So in most countries, there were actually more seekers of jobs than the employment, and the population from rural areas started migrating to the cities in order to live in the overcrowded slums. Okay, and there were food shortage, and yeah, there were rise of food. Okay, this is another point. There were food shortage and widespread unemployment that brought the population of Paris out on the roads. And the National Assembly proclaimed and the National Assembly, what did it do? It started proclaiming a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males above 21, and it also guaranteed the right to work. Okay, it proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult male. So here, males of about 21. Even here, women were not given the suffrage. Okay, it was only male about 21. So even here we can't call it as universal suffrage. Okay, and what else the National Assembly do is that it guaranteed the right to work. And earlier in 1845, an important event that needs to be noted, weavers in Silesia. Okay, Silesia is a place where weavers in Silesia in 1845 had led a revolt against the contractor who supplied them raw materials and gave them orders for finished textile. So on June 4th at 2 p.m. in 1845, the same year, a large crowd of weavers emerged from their homes and marched in pairs up to the mansions of their contractors. So for what was the reason of this marching is that they started, it was in the demand of higher wages, and the contractor fled with his family to a neighboring village, which however refused to shelter such a person. So the army was called then the army was called by the contractor. In exchange that followed, and 11 weavers were shot. In 1848, parallel to the revolts of the poor, unemployed and starving peasants and workers in many European countries, a revolution led by the educated middle classes was underway. Okay, in in 1848. Okay, and the events of February 1848. The events of February 1848 in France brought about the abdication of the monarch and a republic based on universal male suffrage. Okay, the same point. In the previous slide, we saw that suffrage was given to all male adults of 21. So we call it as universal male suffrage because women were not given the right to vote even by this time. So a republic based on universal male suffrage was proclaimed, and in parts of Europe like Germany, Italy, Poland, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where the independent nation states did not yet exist, men and women of the liberal middle classes combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. Okay, so in the German regions, a large number of political associations whose members were middle class professionals, businessmen, and prosperous artisans came together in the city of Frankfurt and decided to vote for an all German National Assembly. Okay, so they all they all met, and they decided to vote for an all German National Assembly. So here is the picture. As you could see, I have added the picture in the slide. So here's the picture of the Church of St. Paul, where the Frankfurt Parliament was convened on 18th May 1848. So, 831 elected representatives marched in a festive procession to take their places in the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the Church of St. Paul. Okay, Frankfurt Parliament was convened in the Church of St. Paul, and they drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy, whereas subjected to parliament. So they drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy. So the head will remain monarchy, whereas the administration will be by parliament. Like, it won't be a monarchical rule. They wanted a nation state. So when the deputies offered the crown on these terms to Frederick Friedrich Wilhelm IV, the then king of Prussia. Okay, Friedrich Wilhelm was the then king of Prussia. Fourth, he rejected it and joined other monarchs to oppose the elected assembly and the opposition of the aristocracy and aristocracy. Okay, and military became stronger. And what else happened? The social basis of parliament started eroding because the parliament, which was formed by this 831 elected representatives, no, the parliament, which was actually this was actually dominated by the middle classes who resisted the demands of workers and artisans. So they consequently lost their support, and in the end troops were called in and the assembly was forced to disband. Okay, the artisans, and they lost their support, and the assembly was forced to disband. And the issue of extending political rights to women was also a controversial one within the liberal movement, because a very large number of women had participated actively over the years during this revolution. So women started forming their own political association. They started founding newspapers and took part in political meetings and associations. Meetings and demonstrations. And despite all of this, they were denied suffrage rights during the election of the assembly. Though conservative forces were able to suppress liberal movements, they could not restore the old order. So they began to realize that the cycle of the revolution and repression could only be ended by doing what? By granting concessions to the liberal nationalist revolutionaries. And hence what happened? Serfdom and bonded labor were abolished. were abolished were both in Habsburg dominions and in Russia. Okay, so the serfdom and bonded labor were abolished both in Habsburg dominions and in Russia, and the Habsburg rulers granted more autonomy to the Hungarians in 1867. With this, part 1 ends. Hope you all would have understood. In case of any doubts, please do post it in the comment box and see you all in the next video. Bye bye.